In the darkness of a New Jersey dance hall in 1918, something magical was happening. Young women glided across the floor, their bodies glowing with an otherworldly light. Their hair shimmered like starlight. Their dresses sparkled with luminescent traces. They painted their lips and teeth with radium paint, creating ghostly smiles that hung in the air like Cheshire cats. They called themselves the Ghost Girls. They thought they were living in a fairy tale. They were dying. This is the story of the Radium Girls, young women who were poisoned for profit, who glowed in the dark, and who fought one of the most important legal battles in American history. Their suffering changed workers' rights forever. Their courage lit a path to justice that continues to guide us today. But their story begins not with death, but with a miracle element that promised eternal life. Radium. When Marie Curie discovered it in 1898, the world lost its mind. This was an element that glowed in the dark, that emitted endless energy, that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. The wealthy became obsessed. They drank radium water from special crocks, costing thousands of dollars. They applied radium face creams promising eternal youth. They wore radium jewelry that glowed against their skin. Radium was more expensive than diamonds, $120,000 per gram. Doctors prescribed it for everything from arthritis to depression. The public believed they had discovered the elixir of life itself. Then came World War I. Soldiers needed instruments they could read in the pitch-black trenches. The solution? Radium paint. Luminous watch dials and instrument panels that glowed without electricity, without batteries, without any external light source. In 1917, the United States Radium Corporation opened a facility in Orange, New Jersey. They needed skilled workers, people with steady hands and sharp eyes, who could paint tiny numbers on watch faces. They hired young women, mostly between 15 and 25 years old, from working-class immigrant families. It seemed like the perfect job. The studios had big windows and felt more like art workshops than factories. The pay was incredible, $20 a week, 3 times what a domestic worker earned. The fastest painters could earn even more with bonuses. But there was one requirement, one technique they insisted upon. To paint the delicate numbers on watch faces, you needed the sharpest possible brush tip. So supervisors taught the women to point their brushes with their lips. Draw the brush between your lips, twist it gently, create the perfect point. They called it lip pointing. The women were told the paint was completely harmless. Company literature compared it to health tonics. After all, wealthy people paid money to drink radium water. How could a little paint hurt? Grace Fryer was 18 when she started. Mollie Maggia was 20. Catherine Schaub was just 16. They painted thousands of watch dials, lip pointing 20, 30, sometimes 40 times an hour, every day. 6 days a week, the paint tasted slightly metallic, faintly gritty, but harmless, they were told, completely harmless. After their shifts, the women discovered something extraordinary. They glowed in the dark. Their hair shimmered with phosphorescent light. Their skin emitted a soft, ethereal glow. The paint residue on their clothes made them look like ghosts floating through the evening streets. They loved it. They wore their best dresses to work so they'd glow at dances. Some painted their nails and teeth for parties, creating spectacular effects that made them celebrities in their communities. Mollie Maggia painted a radium smile on her face for her sister's wedding. Imagine being 20 years old, making more money than your parents, glowing like an angel, and believing you were part of something modern and miraculous. These women thought they were living the dream. But in 1922, Mollie Maggia developed a toothache. Her dentist pulled the tooth, but the socket wouldn't heal. Another tooth loosened, then another. Within months, her entire lower jaw was rotting. Her dentist reached into her mouth and removed pieces of her jawbone with his bare hands. No instruments needed. The bone had become so soft, so destroyed by radiation, that it crumbled like ash between his fingers. Holes formed in the roof of her mouth, connecting her oral cavity to her nasal passages. She couldn't eat solid food. Ulcerations covered her face and neck. When doctors examined the exposed bone tissue, it glowed faintly green in the dark. The radium was still there, still emitting radiation, still destroying her from the inside. Mollie Maggia died on September 12, 1922. She was 24 years old. Her death certificate listed the cause as ulcerative stomatitis caused by syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease. The company doctor's diagnosis implied she was immoral, that her death was her own fault. The company paid for her funeral and gave her family a small payment, along with explicit instructions not to pursue legal action. By 1924, 9 former dial painters from the New Jersey plant were dead. Sarah Milifer, 24, Irene Rudolph, 21, Hazel Cuser, 25. All had worked as dial painters. All had suffered identical symptoms: dental problems, jaw necrosis, anemia, bones that fractured spontaneously. The company said it was anemia, poor health habits, syphilis, anything but the radium. But here's what they didn't say. The company's own chemist had conducted tests in 1924. He found dangerous levels of radioactive contamination throughout the plant. He detected radium in the workers' breath. He measured radioactivity in their bodies thousands of times above safe levels. His report was buried. He was forbidden from publishing his findings or telling the workers. The United States Radium Corporation knew they were killing these women, and they kept it secret. Dr. Harrison Martland, a medical examiner in New Jersey, began investigating in 1925. What he discovered was horrifying. Radium-226, the isotope in the paint, has a half-life of 1,600 years. When you ingest it, your body mistakes it for calcium. It gets absorbed into your bones and stays there, emitting radiation for decades. Alpha particles from radium destroy bone cells at the molecular level. The jawbone, subjected to constant trauma from chewing, showed damage first. The bone became honeycomb-like, fragile, infected, literally rotting while the women lived. Their jawbones would break from the gentle pressure of a dentist's examination. The radiation also destroyed bone marrow, the tissue that produces blood cells. The women became severely anemic. Their bodies couldn't carry oxygen, couldn't fight infection. They bruised from the slightest touch. Internal bleeding caused their joints to swell. In 1927, Dr. Martland obtained permission to exhume Mollie Maggia's body. She had been dead for 5 years. When they opened her coffin, her skeleton was still glowing, still radioactive. 5 years in the grave, and her bones emitted detectable radiation. Laboratory analysis revealed Mollie's bones contained approximately 30 micrograms of radium, several thousand times what's considered safe. Her vertebrae were compressed and fractured. Her skull showed multiple breaks. Her jaw fragments looked like pumice stone riddled with holes. Dr. Martland published his findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The conclusion was undeniable. Radium was killing these women. The lip-pointing technique was the delivery method, and the company had known the dangers all along. European researchers had published studies about radium's hazards as early as 1915. American researchers had access to this information. The United States Radium Corporation's negligence wasn't born from ignorance. It was a calculated decision to prioritize profit over human life. Grace Fryer began dial painting in 1917 at age 18. By 1925, she could barely walk. Her bones were fracturing spontaneously. Her spine was compressing. She was dying and she knew it. She wanted to sue, but she couldn't find a lawyer. New Jersey's statute of limitations for personal injury was 2 years from the date of injury. But Grace's injury had begun years before symptoms appeared. Every lawyer she contacted said the case was hopeless. For 2 years, Grace searched. Finally, in 1927, attorney Raymond Berry agreed to take her case. He had a radical legal theory. The 2-year clock should start when victims discovered their injury, not when exposure occurred. Berry recruited 4 more women: Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, Quinta MacDonald, and Albina Larice. The media immediately dubbed them the 5 women doomed to die. The United States Radium Corporation assembled a powerful legal team and implemented a strategy of exhaustive delay. They filed endless motions. They demanded depositions, requiring the dying women to travel repeatedly to lawyers' offices. They requested continuance after continuance. Every procedural element was challenged, requiring separate hearings. The physical toll was excruciating. Grace Fryer couldn't climb stairs without assistance. Edna Hussman's spine had compressed, reducing her height by several inches. Catherine Schaub wore a back brace to support her crumbling vertebrae. During depositions lasting hours, the women sat in straight-back chairs, their fragile bones grinding and fracturing under the simple act of sitting upright. Company lawyers implied their illnesses resulted from poor hygiene, sexual misconduct, or inherited weakness. The case finally reached a court in January 1928, after 9 months of legal maneuvering. Quinta McDonald was carried into the courtroom on a stretcher, too weak to sit upright. Dr. Martlin testified as an expert witness. He explained how radium accumulated in bones, how alpha radiation destroyed tissue, how the lip-pointing technique guaranteed ingestion of lethal doses. His testimony was methodical, scientific, and devastating. The company's physicians testified radium was harmless, but they admitted under cross-examination they had never conducted independent research, had not examined exhumed remains, and based their opinions on company-provided information. As testimony proceeded, public outrage mounted. Newspapers ran daily coverage. These weren't abstract statistics, they were young women with names, families, and stories. Grace had been engaged to be married before her illness made her unable to stand for a wedding ceremony. Catherine had worked to support her widowed mother. In June 1928, facing mounting evidence and public pressure, the company settled. Each woman received $10,000, about $175,000 in today's money, plus a $600 annual pension for life and payment of all medical expenses. It was a landmark victory. The case established that corporations could not escape liability for industrial diseases through legal technicalities. Workers had a right to safe working conditions. And crucially, the statute of limitations clock began when injury was discovered, not when exposure occurred. But the fight wasn't over. In Ottawa, Illinois, another radium plant had been operating under identical conditions. By 1935, those women were dying too. Catherine Wolfe Donohue had started dial painting in 1922 at age 19. She was skilled, fast, and earned top wages. She married, she had 2 sons, and built a life. Then her hips began to hurt. By 1937, she was bedridden. Her hips had spontaneously fractured, the bones too weakened to support her body weight. Her spine compressed and fractured in multiple locations. She lost 4 inches of height as her vertebrae collapsed. Catherine joined a lawsuit with 3 other women, but Illinois law was even less favorable to workers than New Jersey. The company had declared bankruptcy and reorganized, claiming the new entity bore no liability. The case dragged through courts for years. The company demanded continuance after continuance. Marie Rossiter died in 1937 before the case concluded. Peg Looney died in 1937. Charlotte Purcell died in 1939. Catherine persisted. She was determined to live long enough to secure justice. In July 1938, the Illinois Supreme Court authorized taking Catherine's testimony at her home. She was 35 years old and weighed less than 60 pounds. Both of her legs had fractured and healed bent at unnatural angles. Her spine had curved into a permanent arch. Both hips had broken and fused incorrectly. She could not move without excruciating pain. Court officials, lawyers, and stenographers assembled in Catherine's small bedroom. She lay in bed, propped by pillows, barely able to speak above a whisper. The stenographer leaned close to hear her words. Catherine testified for hours over multiple days. She described her work, her illness, the company's assurances of safety. Her testimony was interrupted frequently for morphine doses to manage unbearable pain. Between sessions, she would lose consciousness, her body too damaged to sustain awareness. Company lawyers subjected her to hostile questioning, implying her illness resulted from poor hygiene or venereal disease. Catherine, barely able to whisper, maintained her testimony with unwavering clarity. Catherine Wolfe Donohue died on July 27, 1938, at age 35. She weighed 59 pounds. Her death certificate listed radium poisoning as the cause of small victory in official acknowledgement. The Radium Girls cases changed America forever. The Illinois Industrial Commission ruled in favor of the remaining plaintiffs. Foundational to Illinois became the second state to hold corporations liable for radioactive poisoning, when communities drink contaminated water. New Jersey. When employees develop diseases from workplace chemicals, they can seek justice because of legal precedents established by Grace Fryer and Catherine Wolfe Donohue. The cases exposed inadequacies in workers' compensation systems. States reformed their laws to cover occupational diseases with delayed onset. Medical monitoring became a recognized employer obligation. The tragedy catalyzed modern occupational health as a scientific discipline. Dr. Martlin's research established methodologies for investigating industrial diseases that are still used today. In 1941, the National Bureau of Standards established the first maximum permissible body burden for radium A limit based directly on studies of dial painters. This became the foundation for modern radiation protection standards used in medicine, research, and nuclear industries. During World War II's Manhattan Project, scientists developing atomic weapons studied radium dial painter cases extensively. They recognized that plutonium would behave similarly to radium in the human body. Research on dial painters informed safety protocols that prevented a second wave of radiation casualties. Long-term studies revealed devastating cancer rates among survivors. Bone cancer rates were 1,200 times higher than the general population. Head and neck cancers increased 50-fold. Many survivors developed multiple cancers decades after their last exposure. May Keene, who painted dials from 1924 to 1926, died in 2014 at age 107, still measurably radioactive 90 years after her last brushstroke. Her longevity remains medically inexplicable. She survived doses that killed her coworkers, though she suffered bone deterioration, multiple fractures, and cancer throughout her life. The Radium Girls were ordinary women seeking decent work who found themselves poisoned for profit. They faced corporate entities with vast resources, legal systems structured to favor employers, and medical establishments complicit in denial. Yet they persisted. Grace Fryer, Catherine Wolfe Donohue, Mollie Maggia, and hundreds of other young women endured unimaginable suffering and fought for justice under circumstances designed to silence them. Their courage transformed American labor law and established that workers' lives cannot be sacrificed to corporate profit. Their story reminds us that industrial progress, divorced from ethical accountability, becomes exploitation. That scientific advancement, without informed consent, becomes experimentation. That economic growth built on workers' suffering is morally bankrupt. The Radium Girls glowed in the dark, first with the radium they were told was harmless, later with the radioactive poison destroying their bodies, and finally with the moral clarity of their fight for justice. They were told they were lucky to have such glamorous work. They discovered they had been poisoned for profit. They refused to die quietly. And in their refusal, they changed America. Their luminous legacy continues to illuminate the path toward genuine justice, reminding each generation that workers' rights are human rights, that corporate power must be checked by accountability, and that no profit margin justifies human sacrifice.